as we're preaching to the choir here, we know that community engagement is a rising trend, both nationally and here at U of L. But the question it sparks for us is, how do we help scholars prepare to do this work? And there's lots written on it, and ideally it could be through ongoing long-term opportunities for reflection and hands-on partnership. But the reality is there are academic structures such as time to degree for graduate students, rotating teaching responsibilities for faculty, and the unacknowledged time needed to maintain long-term relationships. And all of these, so important for community engagement, they mitigate against this ideal preparation. So instead, a lot of people are being introduced to this work through coursework. So we want to talk about some coursework, and we're going to talk about a graduate seminar that we were all in 2019 called Community Engagement. And in this seminar, we did some traditional things like examined the disciplinary histories and the theories and the methods for community engagement. We complemented these academic readings with lots of hands-on opportunities in making small-scale engaged literacy work with a community partner. And it was great. By the end of the semester, people were drafting disciplinary as well as community documents. People wrote grant proposals for a high school club. They did amazing data visualizations for West End Music Hubs, for the Fraser Museum. And this combination of learning the literature and learning by doing taught us valuable lessons about what does it mean to do community engaged scholarship. In addition to that wonderful part of it, we want to also explore some of the pain points as we think about how do we design our own community engaged work and help others to do the same. So in today's talk, we want to talk about the idea of a tactical disposition. There are a lot of concrete things you can learn, but the tactical disposition is something I think that comes more out of experience. And it's the way you approach the inevitable pain points, because we can't anticipate them all. So we're going to talk today about some of those pain points, such as attending to the emotional labor involved in community engagement, developing suppleness when you're working with institutions like JCPS, introducing anti-racist frameworks when you're only a volunteer at an organization, or how do you adapt so much of the American-based CE work when dealing across national borders. So these lessons are specific to the examples that follow, but we think the idea of a tactical disposition is something that you can apply regardless of the specifics of the particular site. And we're hoping that that you'll be able to jump in at the end, and we can talk more about this as we go. So I'm going to hand this over to some of the fabulous presenters that are going first. So I think that Tyra, is that you next?
Yes.
Okay, you're up.
Okay. Often in academic research and in community partnerships, researchers find themselves entering the spaces with their own research timelines and agendas, and these are often guided by the university's goals and the university's timelines and definitions of success. In her book, Tactics of Hope, Paula Matthew argues for a turn from these strategic approaches, which are university and institutional based, and she proposes instead what she calls tactical approaches to community partnerships. Tobias, could I get the next slide?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Thank you. So tactical approaches to community engagement, they are bottom up, starting from the community rather than top down from the university. They are determined by imbalances of power. Tactical approaches reject the idea of the university as a powerful entity coming in to solve the community's problems. They require being present and being responsive to the needs of community partners. And they demand flexibility, adaptability, communication, and creativity. So through this course, I got to work with an after-school group of student activists at a local JCPS high school. And I was able to employ some of these tactical strategies to the partnership, as the goal was for the students to use their own voices, amplify their voices, and enact their own agency. So the group was very student-led, and I stepped into any supporting role that they needed at the time. And sometimes this meant just holding the camera as they recorded videos. I did a lot of proofreading of their letters and speeches, and I just listened and tried to be there for whatever they needed. So these student-determined projects did not adhere to any established timelines. This was all dependent on the students, and some of the projects we worked on even went unfinished as the students decided to pursue other goals. And it was very student-centered, so I had to be okay with that. So I put together some questions to use in reflection to guide your tactical approach to community engagement. I think we've all had to think about these. So the questions are, where is the power in this partnership and how does that affect the partnership? Whose voices are being heard and whose needs are being met? Whose knowledge is valued and legitimized? And who profits from the partnership? And I will pass it on to Caitlin, I believe.
Yep. All right, give me just a second here. Okay, hi everybody. My name is Caitlin Burns. I'm a graduate student in the English department, and I was part of Dr. Sheridan's class last fall. Along with Lauren, who you'll hear from in just a moment, and a couple of other classmates, I worked with the Fraser History Museum as a part of their Celebrating the Sounds of Kentucky exhibit, where they were looking into the history of music in Kentucky. And I was tasked to gather oral histories from several members of the same family about a family member that had passed away a few years ago. And in the course of those conversations, the people I was interviewing became really emotional and talking about this family member. And while I was like prepared to comfort them as a person, I felt kind of like icky and unsettled about my role as a researcher and their role as a research participant. So the idea for this presentation really came from that feeling of ickiness and that pain point. So a lot of community engagement scholarship talks about the importance of reciprocal relationships. So those are relationships where all members of the partnership benefit in some way. But we spent a little bit less time thinking about the emotional labor that community engagement asks of us. Some scholars have talked about it. I'm thinking of Stephen Alvarez's concept of confianza, in particular of trust building, and William DiGennaro, whose quote is up on my slide. It really sort of hones in on the emotional labor and community engagement are really inherently intertwined. So I wanted to make some recommendations quickly with my time here. First is to build reflection really intentionally throughout the community engagement process. So that's thinking about preparing people before they enter partnerships, to sort of be able to think through what kinds of emotional responses might come up, both from the from all partners in the in the nice handy dandy chart I made there. So all the stakeholders in the process. Sort of building in time for reflection afterwards as well. So whether that's in-class writing with students or whether it's checking in with interviewees during the interview, after the interview, sort of reminding them that you were both people who were having a conversation, in addition to sort of like the additional roles that you take on, and reminding them that they can step back, they can take a break, we can move on if we need to, whatever really is going to make them comfortable with that interaction. So overall, sort of my main suggestion is create space and acknowledge that emotional reactions will come up in community engaged work and thinking about how to attend to those empathetically and ethically. And then I will pass it on to Lauren to talk a little bit more about the more material aspects of our project with Fraser.
Thanks, Katie. Hi, everybody. Okay, so as Caitlin mentioned, I'm discussing negotiating deliverables with your partners and how to maintain anti-racist commitments when doing so. So Caitlin mentioned reciprocity, and that was something I was really thinking about as I entered the partnership. I wanted to make sure that both the museum and I got something out of working together that was really meaningful. And since my research interests are in digital and multimodal composing, I wanted to do something with that. And so I proposed an interactive map, which you can see here, that Caitlin and I worked collaboratively on, where we plotted all of the locations of the artists from Celebrating the Sounds of Kentucky. So when we began working, with transferring the exhibit onto this map, I felt pretty uncomfortable with one of the curator's choices. They chose to include an artist named T.D. Rice. He was a blackface minstrel performer who had stolen music from an enslaved man to perform as Jim Crow. And so after some discussion, I decided to leave him off of the map because including him felt like perpetuating his work. And so, time goes by, the partnership ended, and the museum was actually very, very happy with the map. They planned on using it with their teaching materials for school field trips. So I thought this was great. I was really satisfied with it, and I really didn't think about Rice again for some time. But I circled back to that talking with Mary P. And then, thinking about what I've learned since then in terms of anti-racist work, I really see my actions in a different light. I was too reactive to Rice. And instead of doing the difficult but necessary work of challenging this, racist individual, I just kind of took the easy way out, I think. In erasing him from that map, I privileged my own comfort and I missed an important teachable moment with the students who would be interacting with this project. Anti-racist work is about an ongoing commitment to actively confronting racism in order to effect change. As scholars Condon and Young state, we must work to actualize an increasingly just world by continuing to engage resolutely against racism and its effects in our homes, communities, and workplaces. So by not including Rice on that map, it doesn't change the fact that his show existed and that it was racist. It just keeps it from view and prevents the opportunity to discuss why this act was harmful and how we could fight these types of racial violence. So I would say a better approach to finding racist materials and reacting to them would have been to include them and confront them. So the thing is, when you're negotiating your deliverables with a community partner, you just don't know what you're going to be given to work with. And so my suggestion is that when preparing ourselves for this type of work, we really need to be prepared to be reflexive, and we need to be ready to adjust in ways that keep our ethical concerns centered. If we have to work with racially charged materials, we need to foreground an anti-racist approach, an active approach. We need to be ready to sit with that discomfort, to commit ourselves to racial justice, and to respond in ways that actively challenge racism. And this will, offer learning opportunities for all involved, us as well as our partners and anyone who might engage with the materials later on. Thanks. All right, on to Tobias.
All right, so I will jump right in here in the interest of time. So community engaged pedagogies often have explicit social justice objectives, focusing on marginalized populations to amplify their voices or offer training that would otherwise be unavailable to them. While perhaps not overtly political, such efforts can be read as an implicit critique of authority, particularly in places defined by more authoritarian power structures. In such sites, education may be conceived in a narrow, traditional way. Students in their seats, teacher at the front, stick to the book, avoid sensitive topics. I found this to be the case in places I taught in China and the Middle East, where censorship and strict adherence to the status quo were the norm. But for one reason or another, many places don't fit the imagined context of community engagement literature, making it difficult to enact such an agenda. So in this short presentation, I'd like to propose that some key community engagement pedagogical objectives can be pursued in a composition classroom through the genre of the literacy autobiography. For those unfamiliar with it, this genre asks students to reflect on their literacy development, identifying formative moments and influential individuals. In addition to writing their own, students can read and study the literacy autobiographies of others, which might be chosen for their diversity. If possible, the assignment could later be extended to have students interview a family member or older friend or community member and to write a literacy biography. And while the temptation may be to remark on similarities across these, the goal should be to draw attention to differences across individual trajectories, and indeed across communicative styles and means, can provide the grist for classroom inquiry into the nature of literacy and knowledge as socially situated and constantly changing. Such awareness can be kindled into a discussion of the origins of standards, their mutability, and the role they play in our lives. In effect, when it's not possible to go out of the classroom into the community, the literacy autobiography can bring the community, including its marginalized, overlooked, and devalued practices, into the classroom. Expanding conceptualizations of literacy can serve a legitimizing function for non-dominant practices, creating cracks in the walls that exclude them. While not generally thought of in association with community engagement, given their potential to undermine the fundamental concepts on which normative, hegemonic, and exclusionary knowledge practices rely, literacy autobiographies can help us pursue its objectives in places where more traditional community engagement practices are not possible. Thanks very much, and I'll turn it over to Mary P. for the final word.
Mary P., I think you're muted.
Thank you. So in the little time we've left, I just want to say these examples are very different from each other. And that's the beauty of community engaged work. We find meaning in the communities we're a part of, and those are varied. But all the examples seem to me resonate across the examples themselves. How do we make sense of who we are and what we're doing in those particular communities? And of course, unexpected things come up. How do we be prepared to do this sort of work? We're arguing that a tactical disposition is something that is not often enough discussed in concrete ways to explore the problems that might arise. And how do we think about those problems through that sort of disposition? This is an example. Again, this image is an example from that project that Caitlin and Lauren worked on, about somebody in the particular that was interviewed for this project who happened to die over the last year. And the Fraser Museum wanted that particular image up. These are the types of serendipitous moments that make community engagement so wonderful. In addition to validating this wonderful moment, I'd like us to think more about how we're preparing people to enter these difficult and fraught spaces of working with other people, and how a tactical disposition may help us. We're really excited to learn more from our co-presenters for the rest of the day, and we'll be interested in talking more in the Q&A later on. So thank you very much.